Hi, welcome to DIY Homebrew. My name's Jay, and today we're going to discuss the difference between a full boil and a partial boil. Now, a partial boil means that you would take, with Mr. Beer for instance, 4 cups of water and put it into a pan like this, and then pour in the liquid malt extract and sort of dilute that before putting it into a larger fermenter. Now, an important step here is that in these plastic fermenters like Mr. Beer, they have you put a gallon of cold water in the bottom before you put the hot wort that you've created in here with 4 cups of water and the syrup into that plastic container. That's partially to keep it from melting and partially to help you cool your wort down faster so that you can put yeast in it. Yeast should only be put into wort that's usually in the 60 to 70 degree range. If it's too hot, let it cool. If it's too cold, then, well, let it warm up usually if you're at room temperature and at the max amount of water. The more water you add to the whole fermenter, the more diluted your beer is going to be, and the less water you have to it, the stronger, and especially the stronger taste that your beer will have. In my experience, you want to go with a little less water, in my opinion. Some of these beer kits, they want to maximize profit and minimize expenditures and still help you get a good beer, which is true, but I personally like more. Now, the other option is something called a full boil. Now, this is itself only a 5-gallon pot, but by that I mean you would probably take it to about here to get 5 gallons, and there's not a lot of extra space to add in the hops, which do cause the wort to boil over if you're not careful, and there's not a lot of room to add a lot of stuff. So even in this pan, I would still do a partial boil because I would take the water, part way up here. If it was my Mr. Beer kit, it's going to be down here in the couple of cups range, which is why I wouldn't even use it for that. And if it was a 5-gallon fermenter everything was going into eventually, I might take it to like 2.5 and mix my syrup and my powder in there, boil for an hour with hops if I'm using an unhopped extract as we discussed last time, and then dump that into my big 5-gallon fermenter that I don't actually have yet, but I'm working on that. And you would do that. Now, when you do a partial boil, there's a lot of talk of what's called hops utilization. And if you Google that, you're going to come up with a lot of different ideas about it. But basically it is to say that when you're doing small amounts of water, diluting your syrup just enough, and then you're putting hops in it, the hops bittering spreads through the entire container here, but doesn't necessarily, some say, spread throughout the entire fermenter when you've added water to it to bring it up to the whole 5 gallons. I disagree. There are others that do too. I would say with the 2-gallon batches especially, if you get an unhopped syrup and you're adding your own hops and you're going through the process, it's not going to make a huge difference because 2 gallons isn't so much that the hops can't spread around. 5 gallons, I'd even say, is probably borderline. There's people online who agree, who say, the hops, the bitterness difference is really negligible. They might put in a tiny bit more hops, and maybe 5% more, 10% more if they break out the food scale and get really exact for the bitterness. But it's still going to come out. It's still going to come out beer. If you don't love it because it's not bitter enough, you've learned next time to add a little bit more. And it's hard to say how much more because each hops has its own bitterness level, but you can mess with that and get into a place that you like. Now, we can get into the numbers and the exact science on that, but really at this point we should just discuss how it's okay to make a partial boil and put it in a 2-gallon container and it's probably okay to make a 5. But that is what a partial boil is. Now, a full boil would involve a bigger pan than this, probably an outdoor propane stovetop kind of thing, kind of rig, and you would want to boil the water, the liquid malt extract, the powdered malt extract if you have it, any other additives that the recipe might call for, and then the hops for 45 minutes and 15, as we discussed last time. The longer the hops are in, the more bitter they are. The less time that the hops are in towards the end, the less bitter they are and more flavor and aromatic that the hops imparts. And then you boil the whole thing, and it's real hot, and you got to get it cold pretty fast by putting it in ice or buying a wort chiller, which for a lot of people in spaces that don't allow for that is difficult. So you don't want to go out and buy a wort chiller. So your best bet is to probably start out with at least partial boil. And I recommend Googling those terms as well. You'll learn a lot. But start there. Put it in your fermenter with cold water, being careful not to go over the total volume of 2 gallons in a Mr. Beer, 5 gallons in your typical bucket, and using that extract just to dilute it, to put it into that fermenter. So, we'll answer more questions again next time. Remember, like, share, subscribe, and thanks again. Bye-bye.